By now it should come as no surprise that Paula and I love garlic. And on this channel we've covered everything from planting and growing it, to harvesting and even preserving it as garlic powder and garlic salt. But what if you want to store your garlic in its whole unprocessed form? And better yet, what if you also want to show it off at the same time? Well, the best way that we've found to accomplish that goal is by making a garlic braid. But before we get started, if you've missed any of our previous garlic videos, I've placed some links in the description. Because as our regular viewers know, we grow all of our veggies without any fertilizers or chemicals, and instead rely on natural techniques like deep mulch, no-till, and good old-fashioned rainfall. So if any of that interests you, please do check them out. I should also mention that there are a number of ways to braid garlic, and this method is just the one that we typically use. But once you get the hang of these basic steps, all of the other options will be pretty easy to experiment with as well. The only items you'll really need for this technique are some homegrown garlic that's already been cured and ready for storage, and some string or twine. However, you may also want to grab an old towel, a pair of scissors, and maybe even a rolling pin as well. All of these are optional, but as you'll see in a moment, they could come in handy. Now, I mentioned that your garlic should already be cured, and we've covered that process previously, but basically it just means that it's been dried out for a few weeks. You see, when fresh garlic is first harvested, it contains a lot of water content, which can make it prone to spoilage. So, like many other food items, one of the easiest ways to get around that is by literally just hanging it out to air dry. Again, check the links in the description for more details. But once the garlic is dried, the next step will be a bit of a cleanup. The idea here is to just brush off any of the dried soil that was left behind after harvesting. If you're cool with the rustic look, then this is a good place to stop. But if you want your garlic to really shine, then you can also peel off the outermost layer of the papery skin. This gets rid of some of the mud stains and makes it look much more appealing. But just be sure not to remove any more than absolutely necessary, as the skin is also a protective layer. So the more layers that are left, the longer the garlic can be stored. For example, if we take a closer look at the upper portion of the plant, we can see that each of the leaves are neatly stacked inside one another. That's why it's so important to harvest your garlic before all of the leaves have dried back, because each leaf is actually an extension of each of the papery layers around the bulb. So when the leaves begin to shrivel, so do the protective coverings. Too few brown leaves and your garlic likely hasn't reached its full maturity. But too many, and it may not fare as well in long-term storage. But either way, when cleaning up the bulbs, it's probably best to not be too picky. So this process should really only take a few seconds. And then you just need to decide whether or not to keep the roots. Personally, I'm torn between which option I prefer, but most seem to think they look a little better after a trim. So we'll grab the scissors and tidy them up a bit. And that's it. Now just repeat for the rest of the bulbs and our garlic is nearly ready for braiding. But before we continue, I think we should briefly pause for some extra background information. Because depending on which garlic variety you've grown, the next step may or may not be necessary. You see, all of the over 600 species of garlic plants can be divided into two primary categories, hardneck and softneck, where neck refers to the stalk or stem of the plant. In our case, we only grow hardneck because we live in Canada, and that category tends to fare much better in cooler climates. But cold tolerance isn't the only difference. You see, as the name implies, hardneck also has a tough stem that starts in the center of the bulb and continues all the way up to the garlic flower, also known as a garlic scape. Whereas softneck varieties don't have a central stem at all. So if you were to cut the bulb into a cross-section, rather than seeing the cloves neatly and mostly symmetrically formed around a stalk, you would instead see a more random-looking collection of cloves of differing sizes and shapes. Plus, because there's no stem, there's also no scape. Now, as lovers of delicious garlic scape pesto, this seems like a pretty big disadvantage. However, softneck does tend to have a longer shelf life and a more mild flavor, which is likely why it's the more common garlic found in grocery stores. But the biggest advantage to softneck, at least as far as this video is concerned, is that from what we gather, the lack of hardened stem makes it much easier to braid. But luckily, as you might expect, our fellow hardneck growers have found several solutions to that problem. And that's where the rolling pin comes in. Because by simply rolling it out with a bit of pressure, the stem quickly becomes more manageable. However, while this does work to soften up the stem, unfortunately it doesn't help with the other thing that can make braiding difficult for both hardneck and softneck: dried, brittle leaves. So instead, we've had the best success with an old towel. For this method, simply dampen the towel with warm water, lay it out flat, and then pile on the garlic. Next, just roll it up so that all of the stems and leaves are covered, but the bulbs are left exposed. And then just set the garlic aside and let the damp towel rehydrate the brittle bits. But while we wait, perhaps this would be a good opportunity to talk about the basics of braiding. Because if you're like me, that may not be a skill you've practiced very often. However, if you are already a braiding expert, then please also feel free to just skip this portion using the handy table of contents below. For this example, I've asked Paula to donate some colored yarn, as it can be easy to get lost when first braiding with the bushy garlic plants that all look the same. But as it turns out, braiding is actually incredibly easy once you get the hang of it. So for a standard braid, you'll want to start with 3 strings laid out side by side. To make my life easier, I'll hold one end down with some masking tape, but this won't be necessary once we know what we're doing. Now, the basic process is to take the red string on the right and fold it over the yellow string in the middle. The red string now becomes the middle string. Next, we take the blue string on the left and fold it over the red string. Now the blue string is in the middle. And finally, we take the yellow string on the right and fold it over the blue string. Now all strings have been folded to the middle once, and that, my friends, is a completed braid. Now we just continue the process of folding the outside strings into the middle, always alternating from right to left. And then, voila, a full set of braided strings. However, when braiding garlic, we don't just want to include 3 plants. In fact, ideally, we'd want at least 10 or more. So now we need to learn how to insert additional strings as we go. I'm told that this process is basically the same as a French braid, but I barely knew what that was the first time, so I'll assume that at least some of you will benefit from this demonstration as much as I did. This time the first braid is the same. Fold the red string to the middle, then the blue string to the middle, and finally the yellow string to the middle. So far so good. But here's where we add a new piece of string. And the only thing you have to remember is that it always follows the last one that you braided, which in this case is the yellow string. So we'll add another yellow string alongside it. Now we have 2 yellow strings in the middle, and 4 strings in total. Next, we take the red string on the left and fold it to the middle. And since this was now the last string braided, we'll add another red string alongside it, leaving us with 2 red strings in the middle, 2 yellow strings on the left, and 5 strings in total. Finally, we'll take the blue string on the right, fold it into the middle, add an additional blue string alongside it, and then, at the risk of sounding repetitive, we now have 2 blue strings in the middle and 6 strings in total. Then just repeat the process until you've either reached the desired number of strings or can no longer keep them under control. But either way, that's everything you need to know about braiding. So with that, let's check back on the garlic. Most suggest that you should leave the towel in place for anywhere from about 4 to 12 hours, but you'll know that it's ready when the leaves no longer crumble and the stem is more pliable. So now, just like with the yarn, we'll start with 3 garlic plants. And it's generally recommended to start with the largest at the bottom and then work your way up to the smallest. Once again, we cross the one on the right into the middle, followed by the one on the left. But next, we need to make sure that they stay together. So let's grab a piece of the string and tie them up. Any string will do here, but we usually opt for a natural cotton because it's inexpensive, biodegradable, and food safe. Once they're tied together, we can finish our first braid by folding the stem on the right into the middle. However, you'll notice right away that the garlic stems are quite a bit harder to work with, even after being rehydrated. So you may need to bend or even partially snap the plants until they fit into place. But eventually, you should have your first braid complete. Now we can add our 4th garlic on the right, arranged so that its stem is alongside the one in the middle. Then, just like the yarn, we have 1 on the left, 1 on the right, and 2 in the middle. Next, we take the stem on the left and fold it over both of the middle stems. Then add a 5th garlic bulb on the left and add its stem to the middle as well. This results in 1 on the right, 2 on the left, 2 in the middle, and 5 overall. Now just continue this process by folding the right to the middle, adding a bulb, then left to the middle, adding another bulb, and so on until you've reached the desired number of plants. We typically go for about 10 bulbs because it's a nice round number, but this could just as easily be 12 or 20. It really only depends on how large you want the braid to be. But once you're happy, just continue braiding the stems and leaves a few more times to lock everything in. And finally, we'll grab another piece of string to tie the loose ends together. Do a bit of trimming to clean up any leaves that weren't fully tucked away. And just like that, our braid is complete. Now, personally, I really like this look. The simple top is quick and easy to tie up and really gives it a rustic country feel. But like I said at the beginning, there are plenty of other similar options out there. So now that we've covered the basics, you should be ready to experiment with the others, if you're interested. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.